going on, everybody? I am New Yorker, and welcome to episode 5 of Cream Soda Revolutions. This time I want to talk about an album that I've already mentioned. Some scheduling stuff came up, so I didn't end up doing it last episode, but I'm talking about Klaxons this week, specifically their debut album, Myths of the Near Future. This isn't the first stuff that they've released, but it's their first full-length album. I think they released a few singles or something like that before this. But Myths of the Near Future, 2007, a great album. And I've wanted to talk about Klaxons for a little bit. I'm going to get into that near the end. But to start, I'm going to go through song by song. This is an album that I definitely don't have a huge amount to talk about this album in particular, but I do have a lot to talk about with Klaxons as a whole. So we're going to get started. First song on the list. Two Receivers. One thing that I'm going to get out of the way really quickly is this album has a huge science fiction theme. The vast majority, if not every single one of the songs on here, has a science fiction theme to the lyrics. Partially because they were on drugs and stuff and they were writing and recording this album, like any true musician is. I am kidding. Two Receivers is a good example. Two Receivers is, from what I can tell, literally it's about receivers. It's about like transmission receivers, like satellites sort of thing, picking up a signal, and it's how they sort of ignore it. They acknowledge that there's a symbol, and they're like, we're just gonna ignore it. We're gonna pretend it's not even there. And the theme of this song is that it's taking that but sort of expanding that idea of like stuff is happening, trouble is going wrong, and the people who can fix it just sort of ignore it, pretend it's not even there for whatever ulterior motive. This is a cool song. It's a good introduction in that it's a good introduction to Klaxons' sound. It's a good indicator of what their music sounds like. However, it's not a fantastic intro song for an album. I think there's definitely stronger ones. I don't think this is an altogether terrible one, but there could have been a better opening song, I guess. I will say, for example, Echoes on their second album, Surfing the Void. Echoes was a better one. Again, not perfect, but it was a better intro song. Two Receivers is a good one, not great, but it's good. It's not terrible, but it does its job fairly well enough at least. I love the vocal sound on this one. One thing with Klaxons is they have the two, maybe three guys, I think, singing at a time. The one guy has the falsetto voice, which is really characteristic of the genre, and then the bassist has a much lower voice, a voice that is not way outside of my vocal range, for example. And the two of them, I think, are usually singing in octaves. So they're singing the same note, but one of them is in falsetto, like 2 full octaves above the other guy, or sometimes 1 octave above the other guy. It depends on the song and stuff. And Two Receivers makes very good use of that. Next, Atlantis to Interzone. Good example of the kind of weird stuff that their songs are about. This is one of the few songs that I've talked about on here so far that I'm not really sure what it's about. If I had to guess, I mean, it's about Atlantis, clearly. It's in the song title. In a literal sense, it's about Atlantis. I would say to me, this song is a bit more metaphorical. To me, what they're saying is that it's a sort of blending of fact and fiction. It's blending the truth with maybe what you want the truth to be. And this could be a slight against journalism. This could be a slight against media as a whole. This could also be a slight against the people who consume media fervently, sort of looking for what they want to be hearing. Or it could just be about Atlantis. Who knows with these guys? Next. Before I move on, actually, Atlantis to Interzone is a cool, like, more punk sort of thing. And while eventually I'm probably going to talk about the heavy, and there's the heavy song that changes tempos back and forth throughout the song, like in the different sections, and that song I feel would be stronger they if they did a different arrangement of it, where like it starts with the fast section, maybe has the slow section, and then has the fast section again right at the end instead of flipping back and forth. Atlantis to Interzone swaps back and forth between two different tempos, and I think they did it well with Atlantis to Interzone. And part of it's that it's not a huge change. Like it's only a change of like a handful of BPM. Like it's not like they went from 80 beats per minute, which is slow to medium, to like 130 beats per minute, which is fast. It's fast to medium fast. Like it's a much smoother transition. Next, Golden Scans, my personal favorite song on the album, my personal favorite Klaxons song, one of the more traditional, commercially friendly songs on here. It was one of the singles. Um, this one's cool. I like Golden Scans. Golden Scans again really, really showcases the falsetto of the. Damn, I don't remember his name. The one guy. So the dude who married Keira Knightley, whatever his name is, I'll put him in the dump. But he's the one who sings falsetto in the band, and this song really showcases his voice while also showing in the verse his regular like head voice, like his regular singing voice. Because falsetto's, I guess you could classify it as like a trick. It's not your usual voice. And Golden Scans, he goes back and forth during the song between falsetto and his head voice, which is your regular voice. It's pretty cool. It's a song that it's one of the songs that's on my sort of unofficial list in my head, where it's a little short. This one's very short. It's 2 minutes and 46 seconds, but it's really good. You want it to be longer. You know, like every time I listen to this song, okay, maybe not every time, but half the time when I listen to this song, I'll repeat it a few times because I want it to be longer. I want to hear more of this song. But if you really sit down and think about it, there's nothing else that you could add. Like, I don't know what else I would do within this song, you know? So it's perfectly crafted, and it leaves you wanting more of itself, while still being like satisfying enough that it's not like, oh, what the hell? Why did this end already? But you still want to repeat it a few times. And there's not a lot of songs that do that, at least not for me. And this is one of those songs for me. Next, Totem on the Timeline. This is the one that I like showing the lyrics to people, and I'm like, guess what this song is about. It's kind of a history thing. If I had to guess, this one is about a guy who has like a time machine, or he can see through time or something like that. He has some sort of time altering thing. And it's about him being able to like see people from all these different points in history, and how he's just like a totem on the timeline. Like he's just one piece of this huge picture. This is a cool one. This is one that I like singing along to sarcastically, because these guys are from the UK, and the one guy, the guy who doesn't go falsetto, his singing voice is a thick British accent, so I like really playing up the British accent, getting very obnoxious and sarcastic with it. And this song is a great place for me to do that. So I appreciate that. And it's a rad song nonetheless. Next, As Above, So Below. This one's actually a little like deep, which some of their songs you pop some LSD and it gets deep, but this is one that's actually legitimately kind of deep. This is a little bit of a slower one compared to the first four songs, and As Above, So Below is about this idea of we're all the same, but it's not we're all the same in the same way as some of the other songs that I've talked about in previous episodes. This one's specifically about like different classes, how there are lots of similarities, whether you like it or not, between, for example, the lower class and the upper class, between the rich haves and the poor have-nots. That's the idea. As above, the way it is above, so below. That same way is as it is below. It's a cool phrase and it's a cool song. Yeah, that's about it. That's about it. Next, Isle of Her. This is the first, maybe arguably the second if you include Totem on the Timeline's lyrics. But as far as musically, this is the first really weird one. This one, a huge part of the lyrics is rowing, this sort of rowing chant. Row, there's only 7 more miles to go. And they repeat that line over and over again through the song. And the rhythm of this song is like that, like a big drum on like a warship, and a guy just pounding on the drum to keep the rhythm of all the soldiers that are rowing the ship. The Isle of Her, like that they're trying to get to, from what I can tell, is weird. There's like a cyclops on it, and there's a mirror, and some other stuff. I don't know what's going on there, but I personally really, really like this song. I like how weird it is, and I like the rhythm to it. I can sort of almost get lost in a little bit of a trance in this song. It's the sort of thing that I look for in psychedelica. I'm not huge into psychedelica, but the stuff that I do listen to, I'm always specifically looking for, can I stop thinking about the music and just sort of get lost in a trance and sort of do like that shitty basic club dance where you're not really doing it much more than just sort of bobbing up and down. If I can just do that and not be paying attention to anything and just lose myself, then to me that's good psychedelica. Isle of Her is kind of like that. It's very rhythmic, it's kind of pulsing, it's a little psychedelic, it's cool. It's a really rad song. It's not for everyone. I'll definitely throw that out there. I expect Isle of Her would be a song that a decent number of people would skip on this album. I'm just saying personally, I really like this song. Next, Gravity's Rainbow. In stark contrast, another of the more radio-friendly songs. Also another of the singles on this. And this is another one of the songs that they originally wrote and recorded before the album. Gravity's Rainbow is pretty cool. At its heart, it's really a love song. Like the chorus is like, I'll always be there for you, my future love. I guess future love maybe means some other stuff. I don't know. What is Gravity's Rainbow? Good question. But this is definitely a song that is not quite as effective at doing this as Golden Scans, but it's also a good looping song where it's only 2.5 minutes and you kind of want to hear it a few times in a row. Really, really cool track. One thing that I don't think you're going to get at all on this album is there isn't really any of the problem of this song's cool, but it doesn't really stick out, because they all kind of do. Next, Forgotten Works. This is the other, or another of the really weird ones on here, both lyrically to a huge extent, something about a tiger and oil and stuff, but then also musically in the same way as Isle of Her. This is another like rhythmic, pounding, pulsing sort of song, much faster than Isle of Her. This is a song that if you're gonna headbang to songs on this album, this would be one of them, at least for me. Again, in a more psychedelica sort of mindset to it, though. This one, though, is kind of weird in a different way from Isle of Her. So some people won't like either song. Some people will like one or the other. Maybe they'll appreciate that Forgotten Works is faster. Maybe they'll appreciate the themes and stuff to Isle of Her. I don't know. Everyone has their own opinion, right? To each his own. I like them both. I prefer Isle of Her a little, like by a small margin, but Forgotten Works is also a really cool song. Again, though, it's one of the weird songs on here. Next, Magic. Magic is the only song on here that I have like a legitimate criticism with it that isn't just down to personal taste, and that is that the drums are not quantized on this song. What I mean by that is quantization is to fit something within a grid. Align all the parts within something to some sort of grid. In music, what that means is time, making sure that everything is exactly on the beat that it's supposed to be. For example, in dance music, everything is very heavily quantized because everything has to be exactly on the beat, exactly where it's supposed to be, as opposed to something like jazz or blues, where things are very, very minimally quantized, if at all, because the point is it's a little more free-flowing. It's a little more raw. There's supposed to be a lot more room to breathe. Now, I'm cool with not quantizing as long as everything is together. And the drums and magic, especially, I'm not sure what you would call it, the verse, the breakdown, the part that isn't super, super amped up, it's not in time. And it's disappointing because otherwise Magic is fantastic. Magic is a great, like, rave sort of song. You know, kind of punk, kind of dance, very rave sort of thing, which is why the band was dubbed New Rave by themselves, but still. But it kind of takes me out of it during those the lighter, the not super balls to the wall sections, because the drums aren't quantized, and it's a big sort of miss, in my opinion, that they didn't do something with those drums and that no one noticed. Like, to me, as admittedly, I'm a drummer, so it's something that I'm always thinking about when I'm playing, so it's something that I listen to just by habit. So to me, it was very obvious. It wasn't even sort of like something's kind of off, but I can't tell. It wasn't like that at all. It was very, wow, some of this is in time, a lot of it isn't, like during this section. And it's a real shame. Now, I'm not sure if someone else would notice. If I'd like to get someone to listen to the song and then ask them about it, and with me having not like told them beforehand that the drums are out of time. Man, other than that, this is a fantastic song. This is a really good song, really amped up song. And it's one of their coolest songs to do live, because the drums are in time when they do it live. The drums on the recording aren't the best, I will say. Next, It's Not Over Yet. I think this is the final single on here. Another of the somewhat more radio-friendly ones. This is, I think this is the second Klaxons song that I heard. Although I feel like I heard Golden Scans like years before I listened to this album. Like maybe back in 2007 when this came out or something, but I don't know. So yeah, It's Not Over Yet. This one's a little more in contrast to Magic, which is very ravey and dancey. It's Not Over Yet kind of isn't. It's Not Over Yet takes more hallmarks from rock, and like specifically like almost like alternative rock and post rock, and that sort of like open chords, and not open chords but open sound in chords, and synth line over top of it, and the harmonizing vocals are somewhat harmonizing vocals compared to taking cues from dance, which a lot of the songs do. This one doesn't do that, and it works. This is a really cool song. One thing I will say is I wish this was the last song on the album. I feel like this song would sort of I don't know, play the band out. This song would be in a way, like this song would be a great finishing song for the album. And I kind of wish that this was the last song on the album. But there's one more, Four Horsemen of 2012, which in contrast, I don't think ends the album well, like at all. I feel like Four Horsemen of 2012 should have been moved up to somewhere else within the album, because it kind of feels like they just shoved it on at the end. Now, it's a cool song. It's also a very punk-y song. Kind of like Magic, but Magic has a lot of dance stuff to it as well. Four Horsemen of 2012 has much less dance stuff to it. It's like really more punk-y and post-punky in a way. Very little dance stuff to this song. Super cool. I like the whole thing because this came out before 2012, and this came out right near the beginning of the whole 2012 end of the world thing. I do appreciate that they have what's normally the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse and now the Four Horsemen of 2012, which is supposed to be the Apocalypse. It's a nice little nod. Fun fact, this song on a couple different versions of this album, this song is like 20 minutes long, because it's the song and then a bunch of silence and then an instrumental track at the end, which is supposed to be for an art piece. But I mean, they didn't make the art piece, as far as I'm aware. Maybe they released it in secret or something. But other than that, no, I don't think Four Horsemen of 2012 should have been the final song. I think It's Not Over Yet would have been a great finishing song. And I like Magic being right before It's Not Over Yet. So I would have put Four Horsemen of 2012 probably somewhere near the middle or something. I don't know. I don't know exactly where I put it, but not where it is. It's the only thing. So that is the album. That is every song. So I want to talk about a little bit about the album as a whole, but I'm going to be doing a lot of talking about the band. So first, I'm going to talk about the album here, Myths of the Near Future. Again, it was their debut album, and a cool thing about this album is that it's sort of a concept album while also sort of not being. It's like a loose concept album. It's not in like a rock opera sort of level, which something like, for example, Green Day has put out a couple of those. American Idiot and 21st Century Breakdown are both essentially rock operas. So who put out one or two that I don't remember the names of? But like the point of those being like there's a story that is told from the beginning of the album to the end of the album. And as you go through the album, the story advances. You know, for example, 21st Century Breakdown being about the two people, Christian and Gloria, and how they sort of rebel against stuff and a bunch of stuff happens and whatnot. Where this is a much looser sense of a concept album, where it's a concept album in that the album as a whole has one concept, which is their sort of fantasy vision of the future, but it's not a concept album to the sort of tight extent of something like American Idiot or 21st Century Breakdown. And it's pretty cool. It does that, absolutely. It definitely achieves that. The songs are basically all about the future, or at least the ones that I can figure out, they are about the future, and they're about this sort of like fantastical, like science fiction-y vision of the future. It's pretty cool. It is pretty cool. One thing that I think would have been awesome if it panned out, which it didn't, was their original plan was they were going to have a trilogy of albums. Myths in the Near Future would be about the future. Your second one would be about the present, and then the third one would be about the past. And unfortunately, that didn't really happen. You could argue that Surfing the Void is kind of about the present, and I would say that it is and it isn't. It's not, it's still science fiction for sure, but it's less about the future specifically, and it's more about like different places, different worlds and stuff. But the third one, Love Frequency, was definitely not about the past. So overall, it didn't pan out, which is unfortunate, especially since they've broken up now. So that sort of initial vision likely won't ever be realized, which is a shame. That's really it for the album. There isn't a huge amount that I can talk about with this album. The album art is very 2007. Like it's like this amalgamation of different little bits and pieces of like artwork and stuff, and you could barely read the name of the album or the name of the band on it. Like, yeah, okay. One thing that I will talk about first is the album is called New Rave. That's the genre that it's been classified as. And if you know my podcast, you know that I don't like talking about genre unless I'm trying to relate things to each other. Like if I'm trying to relate two bands, then talking about genre helps. Because I could be like, this band is this specific subgenre, and that's how I can compare it to these other bands. Other than that, I don't like talking about genre. But I will talk about New Rave, because New Rave is an interesting beast. They coined the term New Rave. Klaxons coined the term New Rave in relation to this album. And then like 2-3 years later, they abandoned the term and they sort of condemned it. They were like, no, that was stupid. And the movement in a way was kind of stupid. So the idea of New Rave it happened right around here between like 2005 and 2009, I would argue, is when New Rave stuff was happening. These guys, Data Rock, who's another group I really like, and a few other things. Chick 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 was doing stuff at that time. LCD Sound System was doing stuff at that time. And all this stuff is New Rave. So what is New Rave? New Rave is a combination of alt-rock and punk in a way and grunge in a way with dance. And it works super well. It's some stuff that I really like. one cool thing with new rave is, unlike a lot of dance music, new rave is really, really, really good live. Like, new rave has its own like sort of special energy live. Like, for example, one of the bands I name dropped, hell, two of them, Chick 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 and Data Rock, are both very, very strong live acts. Data Rock depends. You could argue that it depends on the year, but at least like back in the day, Data Rock was a really strong live act. And hell, Data Rock in particular really was a live band. Like, they've been doing shit for years, and they only have 2 albums out because they focus on touring and playing all these different venues and playing all these different shows. They're kind of like Fish in that way, in that they're really a live act, and getting their recorded albums isn't quite the same. And Klaxons, I don't think I'd say Klaxons are like a stellar live act. They're pretty good. I haven't seen them live in person, but I've seen videos of them live, which I know isn't the same, but they seem to be pretty cool at that. And that's kind of a characteristic of new rave, is this sort of live, I don't want to say proclivity, but the fact that it's really well done live. And they sort of abandoned that terminology because their sound has evolved. And this is what I want to talk about. Is I've mentioned this before, but I want to talk about it more. And that's Klaxons' 3 albums: Myths of the Near Future, Surfing the Void, and Love Frequency. And it's something that I have opinions on, and I know people have opinions on it in different ways than I do. So I'm going to explain every train of thought that I've seen a sizable number of people having. So I'm going to call them like the main trains of thought. So, Myths of the Near Future. It's new rave. It's a combination of dance and indie rock and punk and stuff, and it's really cool. Surfing the Void comes out a few years later. Surfing the Void is pretty different. Surfing the Void has less dance stuff and more rock stuff, more, I don't want to say art rock, but it's a bit more prog, more like space rock sort of stuff. Like, it's out there sort of rock. Not like Dream Theater sort of prog, but more in that direction, or more of like even like a shoegaze sort of thing to it. So more grungier and more alternative and that sort of stuff, and much less dance. It's a step in a direction. Some people liked it, some people hated it. Personally, I really like Surfing the Void. Then Love Frequency comes out like last year, I think it was. Love Frequency is the exact opposite direction. Love Frequency is a huge focus on dance with just a bit of the other stuff, a bit of the punk and the alternative rock and stuff like that. There's one song, I don't remember the name, but there's one song on there that has like a fairly heavy like punk sort of influence to it, but most of it's just pop and dance, essentially. Again, some people loved it, some people hated it. Here's my thoughts on it. In between Myths of the Near Future and Surfing the Void, they recorded a bunch of stuff that they tried to get made into an album. But their record company did something that I've talked about before, where the record company was like, no, this isn't you. It's super prog and it's super artsy and it's way out there. And people who bought Myths of the Near Future and associate that with you, like, this is way too different and it's way too out there. We're not going to release this. This is something that I have talked about before, where a label wants you to sound like you for them to release your album. So then they went back and they sort of agreed with the record label. They recorded a bunch of new stuff, and that became Surfing the Void. And Surfing the Void was toning down the weird and toning down the prog and the art and stuff, but it was still there. Then a little while after that came out, like a couple years, I think, they publicly came out and they were like, no, this stuff is weird. This isn't really the direction we want to be going on. We want to sort of bring heart back into new rave or whatever. Okay. In my opinion, new rave had sort of moved on at that point. But whatever. They wanted to bring that sort of mentality back and make it more about dance stuff. So then they released Love Frequency. Here's my issue with Love Frequency. It was, in my opinion, a huge overcorrection. Like, let's say Myths of the Near Future is right in the middle, okay? On the right, we have rock and prog and that sort of stuff. And on the left, we have dance and pop. And that's really what Myths in the Near Future is balancing. Alt rock and punk on one side, dance and pop on the other side. What do we get? We get new rave. Surfing the Void was a very clear turn, like veering off towards the right into more indie rock, more punk, more alt rock, more of that sort of stuff. Much less dance and pop. Then it's like they stopped and then reversed straight sideways into the other side, into the left side. And they completely abandoned, with minimal exception, the rock stuff and the punk and that sort of thing, and went full throttle straight into dance and pop. And I can understand them wanting to go more in that direction. It was too sudden. Like, Surfing the Void is pretty different from Myths of the Near Future, but I don't think it's a gap that makes it inaccessible. Myths of the Near Future to Love Frequency, they're like totally different albums. Like, if you were going to listen to them, to their discography in like an order, like if you're going to listen to all three albums back to back, I would start with Surfing the Void, then Myths of the Near Future, then Love Frequency, because then at least there's some sort of progression. Now, that doesn't mean that Love Frequency in a vacuum is a bad album. You know, just because they decided to go with a very different direction, they're like, no, this is what we're going to start doing now. But it ended up being a very mediocre album. Love Frequency is not an album that I'm going to talk about on here, because I don't feel like the album had a lot of heart to it. I've talked about this before. So, here's my issue with Klaxons. I love Myths in the Near Future. I really like Surfing the Void. I don't like Love Frequency. I was very unimpressed with Love Frequency. So, you know, like, it's a situation where it's like, I totally get where they were coming from. I 100% understand their intentions, but it did not at all pan out the way they wanted it to. Certainly not. And it's kind of a shame, ultimately. But I am running low on time, so that is really all I'm going to say about Myths in the Near Future and about Klaxons. Oh, I will say though that it's a little ironic that they coin new rave, and then a few years later they're like they sort of abandon it. They're like, no, that's dumb. And then a few years after that, they're like, no, we want to have the spirit of new rave. Even though by that point, everyone had sort of left new rave behind, and now dance punk was the thing. What's the difference between new rave and dance punk? New rave has some pop in it. Like, it's more pop oriented. The music that new rave is pulling from is more pop oriented. The dance music that dance punk is pulling from has more of like dubstep influences and more like deep house and that sort of thing. So dance punk is going to overall be more of, I don't want to say noisy, but the synth stuff is going to be a little more noisy. It's going to be a little more punk in some ways compared to new rave. So there are differences. There's definitely differences in the genre. And part of it just comes down to bands, like individual bands or individual artists. But there is a difference. You can audibly tell the difference. But that is all the time that I have to talk about this album, so I'm going to do my Music Geek pretty damn quickly. And my Music Geek this week is about sort of combining sounds and taking influences and stuff like this. And this is relevant throughout all of Klaxons' discography. You know, again, they're new rave, combination of a bunch of different stuff. Indie rock, punk, post-punk, alternative stuff, dance, pop, bunch of elements put together to make Myths of the Near Future. You strip some of the pop and the dance, and you get Surfing the Void. You strip the rock and the punk, and you get Love Frequency. So, my point here is they're sort of combining different influences. You know, one word that I use a lot on this podcast is influences. Like, such and such song has influences from these bands or these genres or whatever. Like, this is the sort of sound that it has. And one thing that I'm a little worried about in the news, not like very recent news, but in music news and music stuff, I guess, the industry, somewhat recently, is sort of drawing the line between copying and being influenced by. There's the big thing with Ed Sheeran and Marvin Gaye, I think it was. One of Ed Sheeran's songs sounds like a Marvin Gaye song. Now, I'm specifically saying sounds like, because it's not like he copied it. It's not like he pulled the Vanilla Ice and he was like, here's really the same song but with different words to it. I am, of course, referring to Ice Ice Baby and then Under Pressure. It's not like he did that. It just sort of sounds the same. Like it has the same vibe, the same sort of chord structure, but I mean, he didn't steal the melody. He didn't steal the bass line. He didn't really steal anything. It's all his. It just sort of sounds the same. So now it's like, well, where the hell do we draw the line? Where do we draw the line between stealing and being influenced? To me, as long as you're not stealing something exactly, like as long as you're not exactly copying someone, it's okay. The only exception being if there's a very, very direct and obvious correlation where you heard something and then you tried to emulate that. Example, that would be the Ghostbusters theme. I don't remember his name, Ray something, but the guy who wrote the Ghostbusters theme got sued by Huey Lewis and the News. Now, for all you young kiddos out there, Huey Lewis and the News was a pretty popular pop band from the 80s. Pop rock, that sort of thing. I Want a New Drug or Heart and Soul, a couple examples. Definitely check out Huey Lewis and the News' album Sports. That's a great album. Anyways, Huey Lewis and the News, their sound is basically the Ghostbusters theme. That's what they sound like, with like zero exceptions. Like the horn section that's in it, the keys, the guitar and the drums and everything. Like that is what Huey Lewis and the News sounds like. And the guy who wrote it, Ray whatever, or whatever his name is, he wrote that song after seeing Huey Lewis and the News in concert. Like that night or the next day or something like that, he wrote the Ghostbusters theme. So he got sued because they're like, you're just copying our sound. And I think Huey Lewis and the News won. Like, I think they got money and stuff from it. Either they won or the guy paid them out of court or something like that. So that I can understand. Then I could say, yeah, you're copying the sound of someone else. You sat down, you listened to them, and then you basically did your best to emulate them without copying them. Yes. Did Ed Sheeran sit down and try to sound like Marvin Gaye? I doubt it. So that was just something that I wanted to bring up pretty quickly in this one, and that is influencing and copying and that sort of stuff. Because Klaxons have been influenced by a lot of different guys and a lot of different genres of music, really. So yeah, I guess it was just something that I wanted to touch on. So I'm going to do my recommendation, and then I'm going to wrap this one up. This one dragged on a little, so I hope you guys like longer episodes, because this is one of them. So my recommendation for Myths in the Near Future, it's a daytime album, 100%. I haven't talked about this a lot since the first one, but this is definitely this being the discussion of daytime stuff versus nighttime stuff, daytime music versus nighttime music. This is a 100% full throttle a daytime album. There is not a nighttime song on here. Also isn't a ballad on here, but that's cool. Again, I'm not a big fan of ballads, so that's a plus for me. Anywho, you should listen to this song during the daytime for sure. This would be a cool one to put on. This would be a cool one to put on like during your lunch break, but not something to put on during class, or in the middle, while you're working at your cubicle or something like that, because I feel like this album's going to distract you from what you're doing. Even if you're the type of person who normally listens to music while you do something, this album can be pretty distracting. So put this album on when you can, during the day, when you can afford to be distracted, I guess. So like during your lunch break, on the bus, in the car, wouldn't be a bad one for this one either. That sort of thing. I know it's kind of vague, but like this is a great album. Just listen to it. So this has been episode number 5 of Cream Soda Revolutions, Myths of the Near Future by Klaxons. I have been New Yorker. You guys have, as always, been non-existent, but awesome in your non-existence. Keep being you. So good night, Vietnam, and have a good one.